topic that I was given for this speech was discrimination. As we know in the Catechism, we're told that Catholics must avoid all unjust discrimination against people who are homosexual, same-sex attracted, gay, whatever term you want to use. I have never done a talk on discrimination before, so what you're going to get the first draft of something that I came up with, which I hope will be helpful, which is coming from my perspective as someone who's gay, convert to the Catholic Church, and someone who, as I had to say when they, I think, confirmed me, I'm going to get the phrasing wrong because I always get it wrong, but they make you say the formula of, I believe all that the Catholic Church believes and teaches to be true. So that's where I'm coming from. What does discrimination look like from that perspective? Well, one thing that stands out in my mind when I was first thinking about this topic was a retreat that I went on that was bringing together Christians from a wide variety of religious traditions, from a wide variety of sexual orientations, personal identity, and we were asked to answer various questions about our lives. One of the questions in the sort of getting to know you portion was, which of us knew people who had been victims of violence because of their sexual orientation? And a few of the straight people knew someone, put their hands up, and I'm pretty sure, I think I'm remembering this right, that all of the people who were not straight knew someone who had been physically attacked due to their sexual orientation, either themselves or a close friend or family member. So that's one thing that I think is easy to ignore, right? It's easy to not know. The widespread experience, the expanse, the virulence, and frankly the creativity of anti-gay sentiment in this country. People are weirdly adept at coming up with new ways to try to make gay people feel terrible. And it's really easy to miss, in part because we live in such a bifurcated culture. We live in this culture where many elite institutions which shape the culture, ranging from Hollywood to major corporations, which for some reason Americans seem to regard as moral exemplars, have become quite explicitly pro-gay. And so it's, I think, easy for people to feel that that is what the culture is, that defines American culture. And yet there's this whole other world out there where kids are getting kicked out of their homes, where people are being disowned when they come out to their parents, where people are being attacked in school, where that's such a common experience that I'm still surprised, but I'm increasingly unsurprised when someone tells me that story yet again. I have a friend who works with homeless teenagers, who said that she herself is gay, is celibate, is Christian. And she noticed that a lot of the teens that she saw when she was asking about their backstory, their personal lives, how they had ended up in the streets, said, oh, well, I'm gay and my parents are Christian. Like, that's an explanation of how someone becomes homeless. That was all you needed to say. It's increasingly clear to me that if you are gay, you are more likely to be traumatized and self-loathing the more Christians you're surrounded by. That's completely backwards from how it should be. Our children, right, Christian children, and children in Christian communities should be the ones most assured of God's love for them, of God's mercy toward them, that God created them in love. And yet that is clearly not true today. I have also noticed that you are not protected from violence, discrimination, or a kind of attitude of suspicion in Christian communities if you are celibate. The fact that you believe all that the Catholic Church believes and teaches to be true doesn't actually protect you. Not that I wanted protection, but it's interesting to note that it doesn't protect you, that people will still come up with plenty of ways to dismiss your experiences, to relieve you of your job, as has happened to many friends of mine who were who were either not hired and told that the reason was that they were gay, or who were fired or dismissed from their positions because they were gay, even though they were both believing and living in accordance with church teaching. what the lesson that I draw from that is that everyone in this situation is operating from an attitude of intense fear and mistrust. The attitude that I receive from the people who are in a position to kick someone out of their job because they're gay, even though they're celibate, is not an attitude of confidence. It's not an attitude of sort of openness, but an attitude of we have to protect our extremely threatened community. It's an attitude of people who feel themselves under threat. Meanwhile, unsurprisingly to me, gay people ourselves feel under threat, both physically and in terms of job discrimination and the rest of it. So we have here these two people, or these two camps, which are facing one another with an attitude of fear. What is our alternative to this? And this is what I want to focus on in this talk, is not discrimination itself. I don't want this to be a talk about discrimination is real and discrimination is bad. I'm going to kind of take that as a given. What most of this talk will be about is the alternative perspectives and attitudes that we as Catholics should be taking toward people who are gay or same-sex attracted. I'm going to mostly use gay just because it's shorter, but I do intend that term to cover anyone who has really who is in any of the many identity categories that mean that this debate is really super relevant to you personally. The first discrimination versus is discrimination versus support. And I mean this specifically in terms of support in one's vocation. We all have a calling to give and receive love, to pour our lives out in love for other people as well as directly to God. Most of my book is about the pathways in which gay people can do this within the Catholic Church. So the ones that I focus on are friendship, intentional community, and service to those in need. But there are many others, which if we want, we can go into in the Q&A. But our culture at the moment recognizes at most two kinds of vocation in terms of love. There is marriage, and there is parenting. Catholics sometimes do manage to recognize religious life as a calling that people have, and I'm guessing that Steubenville does fairly well at that. But for most of the culture, the only ways that we understand how adults love other people is through marriage and parenting. This means that any other relationships, no matter how devoted, no matter how sacrificial, no matter how necessary for caregiving they are, go unrecognized. So a friendship, no matter that it has lasted the whole life long, no matter that it involves caring for someone in their old age or through illness, is simply not recognized as the kind of relationship that is caregiving and sacrificial. The sacrifices that friends make for one another are not honored, and they don't receive economic support. What would our lives look like if we personally attempted to honor the obligations of friendship in every area that we personally control? So, for example, if you're an employer, can your employees know that if they have a friend who they need to give care to, who is in desperate straits, that they will be able to take compassionate leave? Can you give honor to friendships and ask after friends and assume that the closest relationship in someone's life may be a friendship? I always think of the time that my sister, every year at Thanksgiving, my sister would do a family photograph. And for a long time, my best friend was coming to our Thanksgivings because her family is very far away. And my sister made a point of, not like she didn't make a big scene about it, but she always would make sure to include my best friend in this photo because she recognized that this friendship was deep enough that it had become a form of kinship. So sort of looking around and asking what are the practical, again, often economic, emotional, and spiritual ways that we can support one another's relationships of love and caregiving, even when they don't look like the major models that we've been given for love and care in our culture, which are, again, are marriage, parenting, and maybe religious life. The second thing would be discrimination versus welcome. A friend of mine who I was interviewing for an article said this great thing, which I always return to, which is, if there are no gay couples coming to your church, you probably don't have a reputation for being Jesus. Which I'm totally spoiled. There are lots of gay couples at my church, which is, I think, a church that has done an extraordinarily good job of being simultaneously open and welcome to everyone, and yet really shepherding us, really guiding us. I've received excellent spiritual direction through that church. But you can't really welcome people if they are going to feel like everyone is staring at them, if they're going to be gossiped about, if they're going to hear people telling them to their face or behind their back, like, we don't think that you should be here. And this is something that happens to a lot of gay people when they begin investigating churches. It's much worse if you are in a couple, but even if you're not, lots of people can often guess that you're gay. Culturally, this is just a thing that happens. And even if they don't, you may end up disclosing this because you want to get responsible spiritual guidance, at which point everything becomes a huge deal, and everything that anyone says to you for the next 10 years is about your sexuality. This is not welcoming. It's not recognizing the real spiritual needs of people. So how would a Catholic community welcome? One really basic, obvious thing is just to speak about gay people with an attitude of welcome, with an attitude of openness. My church has a gay and lesbian ministry which attempts to welcome people from across the spectrum of belief. You don't have to be Catholic, you don't have to be gay. And we've had so many people come to us and say, my son came out last year, I've been really confused. Just seeing the word gay in the bulletin was so huge to know that there was a place in the church that I could go where people were familiar and comfortable with these questions, where I could bring some of the pain that I was wrestling with. So very small, simple gestures that that the people in your community, or that your community includes gay and same-sex attracted people. Should I skip this? I think one thing that we really need to do in terms of welcoming is welcoming people's gifts, welcoming the people who desire to serve and finding ways for them to serve. Right now, I think there's a tendency in some parts of the church to kind of say, unless you are all the way ready right now, unless you are signed on the dotted line in both in belief, life situation, circumstances, and behavior, 100% good housekeeping seal of approval Catholic, you can't serve in our church. There's no reason that needs to be true. There's no reason that we can't try to be creative and find ways that people who are perhaps not yet fully on board, right, are nonetheless able to give to give when they want to give. If people come to you and say, how can I serve the church? I think your first impulse should be to try to find a way for them to serve. It may not be the way that they want to serve. It is okay to not have Nancy Pelosi teaching CCD. That's fine. But is there something she can do? Is there something that we can offer to people to really bring them deeper into the church, instead of attempting to protect the church from them? Yeah, I guess, and a sort of short summary that I have written here is that we need to welcome the gifts of sinners. We need to welcome the gifts of the unrepentant, and we need to welcome the gifts of the unconvinced, which is a separate category. The third thing, discrimination versus solidarity. I think I'll often hear when I'm talking about the sort of the difficulties of gay life in a church which does not really support lay celibate people. I'll often hear the response, well, look, I'm single, I'm straight, life is not always fun for me either. Can't you kind of deal with it the way the rest of us do? I think that's coming from a place of real experience, right? There are ways in which it is easier to be gay for me, to be gay and celibate, than to be 40 and straight and wondering why I have not found someone to marry me. I know why I haven't found someone to marry me. And so it's possible, I think, to recognize the real struggles of other people, but not to turn it into a competition or a kind of which of us is suffering correctly. But to instead say, how can we serve one another? How can our vocations build one another up? instead of competing for attention or for compassion. Wesley Hill, who's here, just wrote a book, Spiritual Friendship, Finding Love in the Church as a Celibate Gay Christian, which closes, I'm sorry, can I give away the ending?
Sure.
Which closes with a beautiful depiction of his friendship with a married couple, in which it's very clear that friendship and marriage are vocations that can flow together, that can sustain one another, build one another up. I think asking ourselves, how can we take that perspective of how can we make our different callings from God build up a community? Would be one really obvious, because if you're viewing someone as a support for your own vocation, you're inherently not going to be discriminating against them. You're going to be viewing them in a completely different mindset, where what you want is to find ways that they can help you, and that you can help them in their vocation. And then the last one would be discrimination versus discipleship. And this element includes a challenge to people in kind of both camps. The discipleship is a process. It's a journey. It can take time, and it can be a long and winding road. It is not always the road to Damascus, immediate change, and it's not always the rich young man, immediate rejection. The interesting thing about the story of the rich young man is that at the end of it, when Jesus has told him what he has to do, and he's decided he can't or doesn't want to, he goes away. This is actually kind of convenient, because now the disciples don't really have to deal with someone who's tagging around behind them saying, wait now, I still don't want to give away all my stuff, but I want to know more about this Jesus, I want to know more about the way that you're presenting to me. So the situation that we're most often faced with in our churches is not really the rich young man, right? It's someone who wants to be, in some way, a part of the Catholic faith, but who is unconvinced, or of some elements of it, or who is not ready, or who's not sure. And so the challenge to those who are willing to kind of accept what the church teaches is to walk with that person, to give that person time, again, to welcome that person's gifts, and to seek to grow in friendship and in solidarity with that person. The challenge for the person who's in that position, the person who is unconvinced and unsure, is to accept the church, is to accept that the church is what she is. And that is going to include accepting that you may be in the highly traditional, highly honorable category of the bad Catholic. It's okay. That's a position that many people find themselves in their life journey, of being in tension with the church, of being uncomfortable in the church, of being alienated within the church, and of not being able or willing, we don't always know, to fully surrender. What that, I think, means I think one thing that we need to revive in Catholic communities is the understanding that it is okay, in some sense, that it is a normal part of Catholic life to be at a stage in your life where you can't take communion. Reviving the practice of spiritual communion, and saying that is a beautiful and honorable witness to the truth of the faith, to one's own position within it, that is a way of saying, I accept that the church is what she is, and that it is she who is the judge, that she will judge me more mercifully than I judge myself, more mercifully than I judge her, and that I am going to accept that my position vis-a-vis the church at this moment is not unconflicted. I wonder if this perspective is perhaps easier for me to understand because I came into the church largely because I really needed the Eucharist. The doctrine of that the Eucharist became the body and blood of Jesus Christ, which you then eat, was simultaneously shocking to me when I first heard it, as it should be, and at the same time profoundly attractive. There was something in it that really spoke to me. And although I would not have put it this way at the time, I think it's fair to say that what happened in my conversion, the reason that I was willing to enter the church, even though I did not understand the church's teaching on sexual ethics and did not intellectually accept it at all, the reason I was willing to accept it as a guide for my personal life was that I I could trust the church who gave me Jesus in the Eucharist to give me Jesus the way, that is a way of life, which includes a sexual ethic. So I think I guess recognizing that there is a way to be a witness to the authority of the church in your life, even when you are not willing to assent to the church's teachings on all subjects. And that way, I have to tell you, is spiritual communion, is not receiving the Eucharist at Mass. And not judging other people, obviously, for not receiving. As with most challenging things like forgiveness, discipleship is unjust. It is harder for those who are already socially marginalized. It's harder for those who are marginalized within the church. It's harder for those who are stigmatized in society and in the church. It is not fair. And there's really no way around it. The metaphor that I personally find helpful in understanding how to live in a world where the things you really have to do, like forgiveness and discipleship, are set up so that they're harder for people who already have a harder life. The metaphor that I find helpful for this is surrender. That all you are really called to do in life is surrender your ego. That's all. But different people will find different metaphors helpful. I think the image of Christ the Liberator may speak to a lot of people, that Christ liberates us from sin. That's really important. Christ liberates us from the oppressive social hierarchies that have placed man above woman, rich above poor, straight above gay. And in order to be a part of Christ's liberation, you do have to follow him. And then the other metaphor that I do think about a lot, especially when this stuff is hard for me, is the metaphor that is in, it's from the Psalms. I'm going to get it wrong if I try to guess which ones, but it's in more than one. My spiritual director reminded me of at one point, when I was having a very difficult time with another person, I felt that she was demanding from me things that I was not capable of giving. She was sort of like feeding off me. And he was like, think about it this way. This other person, is not a believer. You are the tree that is rooted beside the living water. You are the tree that can draw up through its roots the water of faith, be replenished, and bear fruit. And as soon as I began to think in that way and see how replenished I was constantly being by God, the easier it was to see that I actually did have more to give than I had thought. So I think attempting to kind of, in recollection, come back to the knowledge that we are full already, that we have been renewed, that we are constantly being fed and cared for by God, is one way that we can remind ourselves that we actually do have a lot to give and are not speaking from a position of deprivation, and therefore do not need to be speaking from a position of fear. Yeah, I'll stop there. Sort of abruptly. But that was a lot. So I'm hoping something in there will spark people. You can pick up on any of that. If there's something that you didn't catch, let me know, because I think I probably also talk too fast, as I usually do when I'm giving something for the first time.
Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it. So now we're going to have a question and answer section where if you have a question, ask Eve and she'll give you an answer. Be aware that this will be recorded as well. So if you're comfortable with your question being advertised, then go ahead.
Oh, and actually on that note, I should say, my email is very easy to find, but it is just my name. It's Eve_Tushnet @yahoo.com. I still use Yahoo. People do, some people. So if there's anything that you don't think of until later, or that for whatever reason you don't have time talking about after, you can email me. I answer all my email eventually. And then two, again, the Q&A is going to be recorded, but if that's not comfortable for you, I'll be here signing books for quite some time after. So if you want to catch me then, that would be another way to do it. Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. Question, what do you define discipleship as? because I'm not sure I necessarily got your definition. And how has that affected your journey into the Catholic Church and throughout after your conversion process as well?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You're right. I was sort of assuming, I guess, a definition of discipleship as sort of growing in one's ability and willingness to follow Christ, to follow wherever he's leading you. That's going to obviously include following the way of life given to you by the church, but also following your vocation. Answering that sort of more specific call. In terms of my own life, I converted when I was 19, which is a very embarrassing age to do anything. I look back on the way that I tried to live out my faith at that time, and more than anything else, I think I wish two things. One, I wish I had focused more on Jesus. Basically, the only place where Jesus was really central to my faith was the Eucharist, and that's really important. But I don't think that I paid enough attention to the life and person of Jesus, and to sort of the work of Jesus that we're told in Scripture. I found the Bible so weird that I think I sort of sidelined it in a way that I wish I hadn't. And then the other thing is that I wish that I had thought about sort of the moral life, or the life of interaction with others and with oneself, as less of a game with rules. So, like, how far can you go? How far can you go before you have to confess it? And more about sort of how can I live out a call to love? I think if I had asked that, how can I honor my body? How can I honor the people around me? How can I serve them? It took me a very long time to come to that point. And you'll... Now you hush. So that's where I'm at now. I'm sure 10 years from now, I'll look back and be like, oh my gosh, in 2015, I was so dumb. Like, here's all the things I've learned since then. But at the moment, those are the two big things.
You said that you're continuing to learn more things. Will you ever think about writing another book about your experience after?
I am. So I actually did a series on my blog. If you click, there's a tag that says Gay Catholic Whatnot. If you click that, some of the stuff that comes up will be actually a series that I did that was sort of follow-ups, which because I wanted to be cute, called DVD extras from my
honor
book.
the beauty of the body.
But it's
How
a lot
do
of stuff
you
that
not
either
just sort of,
I
like,
simply not
view your body
encountered,
as a tool to be used, or
when I
even
read
an
the book,
enemy to
or
be
that I
fought,
sort of
but
hearing
actually
from
as
people
a
that
friend, as something given to you by God.
I'm thinking pretty seriously about collecting all that stuff.
So yeah, sorry, that was really long.
So yeah,
so there's a series on my blog. It's the short version.
One thing that's kind of fascinating is that a question which may seem like the narrow concern of a tiny minority actually opens up on many much broader questions about the way that our culture structures people's need to care for one another, to give and receive love. And other questions, like how do you, as a lay celibate person, honor the body, honor the beauty of the body? How do you not just sort of like the answer? There's a series on my blog, is the short version. Yes.
Thank you for speaking with us this evening. I had one question of clarification and then a separate question. The one of clarification was on accepting your opposition to church teachings, and in that regard, making spiritual communion while not receiving communion. And I was wondering if you could clarify accepting, because that seems like a broad sweeping term, because that's never something accepted to be in conflict with the church and to be not accepting of her teachings, and then also to not receive the communion, because every person should be receiving the communion. And so I was wondering if you could clarify on that accepting. And then my separate question was, the church clearly states that same-sex attraction is a disorder. And that's pretty clear in the Catechism, and so that goes on also to what is disorder, whether emotional, mental, whatever the case is, and then also the Church speaks quite clearly on rectifying disorders, and so that it seems to me that with same-sex attraction being a disorder, that there also has to be some work into rectifying that disorder as well, and perhaps not just simply putting a stamp on, okay, I'm celibate now, but rather going on to try to work with that.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could speak on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So to the first point, right. I think that acceptance is you're right, is an odd word to use for this. I think a degree of honesty, and people are in states of imperfect submission, right? All of us, at all times, and kind of figuring out where you are in that process of learning to, as the language I like, learning to submit and surrender more and more every day, is primarily about honesty with yourself and with God, about what you actually believe and what you actually are willing to give, where you actually kind of stand in relation to the church. I believe it is actually really important to make a space for people in the church who are not all the way there, right? In terms of accepting the church's morals and ethics. I believe that is an intrinsic part of what the church exists for, is to give us this way of life. But it's hard, right? People take a long time, and we have to have some way for them to continue to follow and to stay in the community that is the church, to stay in the body of Christ.
Another example, all of you have probably seen the elderly couple in the back of the church who never go to communion. They're probably living together without the benefit of wedlock. And they love the church and they go there, and they accept, as you say, a large part of the teaching, and yet they can't receive communion because they know they're not living according to the moral standards of the church. I mean, that's another group of people that I think was...
No, I think there's a lot, and I think that it's in many ways a way of showing that both your submission to the church and that you are surrendering your right to judge whether or not you can commune. You're giving that to the church, even as you still struggle with really whether you can accept all of the rules and sort of regulations, or other parts of the church doctrine. It doesn't have to be about morality. I find it really beautiful when someone is willing to follow as much as they can. The disciples, right, constantly get stuff wrong. What makes them different from the rich young man is that they tag along behind Jesus anyway, even while they're fighting with each other and saying dumb stuff.
And to follow up on this, one of my relatives he was divorced and remarried, and he kept going to Mass, just sat in the back, didn't go up to receive communion for 40 years, until his first wife died, and he was able to get his marriage blessed by the church, and he was able to go up and receive again, and cried tears of joy, and still sits in the back. But if people in that parish had been harder on him for his situation, who knows? I mean, maybe he would have ended up leaving the church instead of persevering until his situation was able to be healed.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. Yeah. You're right to point out that this is not the ideal, right? I think everyone involved in this situation knows that it's not the ideal. One person thinks that it's not the ideal because the church is being stubborn and bigoted, and I think it's not the ideal because the person has sort of imperfectly submitted. But I think everyone recognizes that this is not something to be accepted in a kind of like eschatological, this is how it should be sense, but more like this is where factually we are. So second question. Yeah, so the language of disorder. I've sort of softened on this language, in part because some friends of mine have helped me to see that it doesn't have to be handled the way it often is handled in the church. Very often when we hear the language of disorder, we first of all place it in a sort of medical or psychiatric context. You'll hear a lot about like attention deficit disorder, or other things that, post-traumatic stress disorder. Which we simultaneously recognize is not the person's fault, it may be the fault of things others have done, but it's sort of a psychiatric illness that we wish to address. This is not how the church should be approaching same-sex attraction, in my opinion. And therefore, sort of asking, what else can disorder mean? What else can healing mean? What might be helpful? I think we often we're tempted to think that the problem in same-sex attraction is the same-sex part. That the way that you heal from same-sex attraction is to become straight. What if we thought of it instead that it is the way that the attraction is being expressed that is not properly ordered? What if this is someone that you're genuinely being called to love in friendship or in service? What if there are other ways to live out your desire for intimacy and service to those of the same sex? That would be another way to order your loves in accordance with the church teaching, and one that I think is frankly a lot more likely for most people, and less harmful to try to do. So that's one sort of piece of the puzzle. I do, though, want to complicate this idea of rectifying, or I've mostly heard the language of healing, but rectifying disorder in two ways. One is to say the thing that I just said, which is that there are different ways to order one's love. And I feel like I'm getting confused now. Oh, right. My friend Ron Belgau has this line that I thought was really profound and that has been very personally important to me, which is that living out celibacy requires healing of one's sexuality. Learning to live celibacy in a holy and self-giving way requires a great deal of healing and a great deal of sort of reordering of oneself. And you can still be super gay at the end of that. And then the other thing is to think about the language that I've more often heard of healing is like, does God always heal stuff? We see a lot of Jesus healing stuff in the Gospels. He clearly is invested in this in healing. This says something important about our condition as human beings. But then also, when he in his glorified body appears to the disciples, he has the wounds. So there's apparently something going on too, that not everything is healed. That there may be some role for wounds themselves to play, even in Jesus' resurrected body. So that again, to me, I think kind of complicates, like maybe what God is going to do with this is actually to glorify it rather than to heal it. I will say that you don't get to pick which he does. I've known people who would have preferred that Jesus glorify their same-sex attraction, who instead fell in love with someone of the opposite sex. So you kind of you have to accept that you're not the one who decides how you're being called to follow God. That was super rambling. I hope that at least gave some perspectives that it's possible to accept kind of whatever.
Thank you.
Yes.
So would you say that this rectification is one that's more teleological than it is perhaps healing in the sense of medical, psychiatric healing?
Yeah, I think putting things in a medical or psychiatric framework, which I think for Americans at least, the disorder language I think often is heard that way. Yes, I think it is about the ordering of one's loves, and that's by far. I think that's actually the accurate interpretation, just from a perspective of what did the writers of the Catechism think they were saying, and I also think it's vastly less damaging to people psychologically to think of it that way. Yes.
Since you are so gracious as to accept the language of disorder,
I should say, I think because it is so easy to misunderstand, and because it is so easy to view as this means you should be straight and that's the goal for your life, I would prefer that the church find other ways of talking about this. I don't use it myself, but I do think it's important to kind of say, what else could this mean than you should go to therapy to become straight? Because I do think it means things other than that.
and St. Paul had a thorn in his flesh that he could never get rid of. What would you have the straight Catholic Church, so to speak, except in your experience, you've spoken of friendship. Is that one of the things that you would like to see this church think about more? And can you explain that? If
Yeah,
it's true?
absolutely. So a big chunk of my book, and unsurprisingly most of Wes's book, is actually about, his book is shorter than mine, so if you only read one, read his.
That's extremely generous of you.
But mine is more convenient because they have it here. Like a big chunk of the book is actually about sort of renewing friendship as a potential site of sacrifice and love and caregiving. I think Christians can be at the forefront of this because it's in our theology, in our history, in our scriptures. Jesus from the cross gives his mother to John and John to her as people who, because of his friendship with John, are now family. This sort of happened in my own family, where a woman who we always knew as Great Aunt Florence, I to this day am not sure if she had any blood relation to us whatsoever. She may have been some kind of cousin, but she was my grandmother's best friend, is the important part. As they grew older, my grandmother was widowed, my grandfather died, Florence moved in with her. They took care of one another for a long time. My grandmother passed away. Now Florence, who is quite old and quite frail, is being cared for by her best friend's daughters. So that's the kind of use of friendship to build up a familial community, a kind of, Wes borrows in his book from Pavel Florensky the image of the atom. Is it molecules are built out of atoms, not the other way around? Right? Is that right? Okay. Sorry. The atomic bond created by friendship can then be built out by friendship and familial relationships to create the atom of the parish community. So that's one thing. So friendship is one thing. I think there are other vocations that one could also discover. Certainly artistry is one which historically, as the culture we now call gay developed, there were plenty of people who viewed their same-sex desires and their artistry and their faith as deeply intertwined. There was that whole rash of converts to Catholicism at the end of the Victorian era among the artistic and writerly class of people who eventually ended up, I think, living out their vocation as a vocation of artistry. So that would be another model that we could look at to say, like, there is a way that you can devote yourself to beauty, devote yourself to physical beauty, and devote yourself to building up the church, to building up the kingdom of God through artistry. That is not a comprehensive list. Those are just the two that I'm most interested in.
Okay, thank you.
So I think this is a question that's becoming more and more pertinent whenever we see states like Indiana passing certain religious freedom laws. How would you, as an Orthodox Catholic who accepts church teaching, reconcile the need for non-discrimination, legal non-discrimination against gay persons, as well as a need to respect people's religious convictions? How do you reconcile the two?
So on a political level, I'm to be honest, like pretty conflicted and unsure. I try to stay out of what the specific legal regime should be. On a personal level of what should your practice be, the thing I said on my blog, is sort of similar to what I said in the welcome section of, like, look for ways to serve. On a sort of dumb example, if someone comes to you and says, like, or actually, here's a good example. If someone says, can you come to my same-sex wedding? I personally think you just can. I have. But if for whatever reason you don't think that that's something that you can do, are there other ways that you can serve the people involved? Are there other ways that you can care for them, cherish them? Can you prove the unconditional part of unconditional love? Because that's the part that really needs to be proved. I think the more Christian communities seek ways to serve those who were often culturally positioned to be in opposition with, the better. That was a lame ending. So for example, one of the reasons that the fight over bakeries, making cakes. This shouldn't be a big deal. The reason that it's a big deal symbolically is that it represents, in my opinion, a failure of Christian communities to serve homeless teenagers, and to serve the actual gay people who are hurting in their communities. If we knew that Memories Pizza, right, was giving out free pizza to homeless kids, things would look different. And things did look different when they got all those donations and in fact gave it away. This is like a pizzeria that for some godforsaken reason said that they would not do pizza for a gay wedding. Why? So yeah. Basically, fairly often people do come to me and they say, how can we as Christians serve the gay community? And I'm really excited. And then they say, so that they'll listen to us, so that we can earn credibility in their eyes. This is the wrong reason to do it, partly because I don't think it will work. And it's one of those things where if you try to serve someone else in order to extract some concession or obedience from them, you are extremely unlikely to get it. You, I think, are somewhat more likely to get it if you do it for its own sake. But even there, most of the time, people are going to do what they're going to do. So I'm not presenting this as the way to solve the religious freedom versus gay rights fight is for us to serve gay people. I don't know that will solve it. I do think it will be better for us, like spiritually.
Sorry to ask the second question, but from students at the university who have a great tendency to go into pastoral leadership positions in parishes throughout the country, how, from a pastoral lay perspective, can we as Catholics and as those who are trying to honestly love bring and be welcoming to those who struggle with same-sex attraction? Because how can we do that from a pastoral perspective within the parish in leadership positions that aren't necessarily from the pulpit?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I offer some thoughts on this at the end of my book. There's sort of suggestions for people within the churches. And a lot of it, there's a couple things. One is, again, seriously, just if you just speak about gay people and gay issues with an attitude of welcome and kind of recognition that these are people you may know, it'll turn out that you know way more of them than you thought, because you will begin to be viewed as a safe person for people to come to. So doing that and being open to the challenges that it will bring. If you feel called to do more than that, I think, seeking out places where people are hurting. This probably would be a disaster, but I have this fantasy that every gay activist in the United States would have to volunteer at a crisis pregnancy center, and every conservative Christian in the United States would have to volunteer at a center for homeless gay teenagers. It's not that hard to find people who really need care, and if you ask yourself, how can I give in a way that is not about convincing them, but solely about serving, I think that's a good way to get a grounding in real experience that you can then bring to your pastoral care of others who are within the church. That sort of teaches you fairly quickly, I hope. Yes.
Hi, Eve. Thank you. I came in late, so I'm hoping to get the recording. So my question actually, I guess is a little bit more subtle, is I've witnessed a lot of different situations on this issue. One of them being the idea of living in a celibate, romantic, committed relationship, and trying to live in the church, receive communion, be in full communion to people that really want to live the church's teaching. But I think that at the end of the day, there's a big difference between romance and friendship. And I'm just wondering what you would say to that difference, and what you would suggest to people that are thinking about how they should relate to this other person that they love deeply, whether they should be pursuing romance, whether that's something good that they should pursue and that's within the scope of the church, or if it needs to be something different like friendship.
So the actual thing I would say to somebody in that position is, can you find a competent spiritual director? Because I think with situations like that, it is so personal that you need someone who can really guide you, someone that you trust. That's sort of the first and most basic thing. Beyond that, I think a lot of this is really about the language that we use to ourselves, right? Language really does have carry a lot of meaning because it implies certain narratives. I'll say this, I'm going to try to be really circumspect because this is a situation that I'm not in, right? So I don't want to project onto other people. But the loving, intimate relationships between people of the same sex that I have known to be most successful within the church, so non-sexual, have been using the language of friendship, of brotherhood or sisterhood, and of monasticism, of sort of monastic community of two. All of these three things have lineages that are well in line with church tradition and teaching. Romance, for anybody, does not have that lineage. Romance, Dennis de Rougemont is a controversial figure, but if you read his book, Love in the Western World, he at least takes the line that the whole concept of romance is in many ways opposed to the concept of marriage, and that a great deal of our problems today come from trying to have both. Romance is a conflicted category in a way that marriage is not within the church, in the way that friendship and monastic life and brotherhood or sisterhood are not. So I would say, consider whether there are other traditions and languages that will teach you more about what you're trying to do here than the Romance language.
Cool, thank you.
Alright, well, thanks everyone.
One more.
Would you be able to speak at all to transgender issues?
I hesitate to do so. If you want a good, informed position, Melinda Selmas has done a lot of work on these questions. You can find her blog is sexualauthenticity.blogspot.com. She also blogs at Spiritual Friendship, which is a group blog by people who are attempting to sort of shift the conversation on issues of sexuality within the church from an Orthodox perspective. So you can find her name there and click on her post, and you'll see a few things that she's written on the subject. I have opinions, but I would feel irresponsible kind of airing them.
What was the name of the blog again?
Oh, sorry, spiritualfriendship.org.
Alright. Great, well, thank you. Yeah.